This is the incredible story of the greatest city that has ever been swallowed by the sea. Welcome back to our channel Ark Studio. The year is 365 AD for centuries. The Egyptian city of Thonis-Heracleion has been a hub of trade and culture, a place where East met West and all the world's goods came together. It's one of the largest cities in the Mediterranean, home to some 500,000 people. But this great metropolis is built on a shifting foundation. And over the course of the next few hundred years, it will slowly sink beneath the waves until not even the pyramids are left above water. What happened here is nothing short of miraculous. But what caused it? Did God curse the city? Was it the wrath of Poseidon? Or could there be something more natural at play? We now know that Thonis-Heracleion didn't vanish overnight, but rather over the span of many centuries. By 1000 AD, only part of the city was submerged and people still lived there. So we have time on our side, which rules out sudden events like earthquakes or violent storms. Instead, scientists believe that Thonis-Heracleion was undone by geological instability. There are three main theories for how the city sank. First, it was crushed by a massive tsunami. Second, it was destroyed by repeated earthquakes. Third, the shifting sands of the Nile Delta undermined the city's foundations. Each theory has some merit, but each is also lacking. To date, there's no archaeological evidence of a mega tsunami. Earthquakes are common in Egypt, but none are recorded during the city's decline. And while the Nile Delta is indeed shifting, that alone can't explain what happened at Thonis-Heracleion. However, the soil might be the key to all three theories. You see, Thonis-Heracleion sits on the coast of Egypt's Nile Delta in an area called the Rosetta Depression. It's a low-lying stretch of land about 70 kilometers long and 25 kilometers wide. In ancient times, the depression was a large, shallow lake. But around 1000 BC, the lake was cut off from the Mediterranean by a natural dam made of sand. Over the next few hundred years, fresh water from the Nile filled the lake and transformed it into a swampy marshland. Now, the Nile regularly floods the surrounding area, depositing silt and clay that builds up over time. This fertile soil is the reason why Egypt became one of the most important civilizations in the ancient world. Unfortunately, it's not very stable. Today, the Rosetta Depression is crisscrossed by canals, drainage ditches and roads, not to mention the remains of Thonis-Heracleion itself. Archaeologists estimate that nearly 50% of the city lies beneath the modern seabed. All that clay, silt, and peat was gradually deposited by the Nile over a span of hundreds or even thousands of years. So here's where the soil comes into play. Clay particles are much smaller than sand, and they pack together tightly, creating a dense material that can support heavy structures. But clay expands when wet and contracts when dry. So imagine building a house on a layer of clay. When the clay is dry, the house is fine. But after a rainstorm, the clay expands and pushes against the house's foundations, threatening to topple it over. Now imagine the house is twice as tall as the layer of clay below it. If it's built on dry ground, it's perfectly safe. But if the clay layer expands, the house may crack or collapse. This is known as differential settlement. It happens when a structure is built on weak soil that shifts and tilts over time. The Nile periodically floods the surrounding area, depositing silt and clay that builds up over time. This fertile soil is the reason why Egypt became one of the most important civilizations in the ancient world. Fortunately, it's not very stable. We're talking about a city here, though not a house. Every inch of land had to support not just buildings and shops and workshops, but entire neighborhoods and public spaces, temples and tombs and palaces. Not to mention the countless other structures that pop up in a city of 500,000 people over the course of several hundred years. The weight of all those structures had to be supported by a thin layer of clay, the consistency of wet sand. That doesn't sound like a recipe for success. If we go back to the example of the house, you might think that doubling the weight of the roof would cause it to collapse. But it turns out that increasing the weight by a factor of 10 or even 100 might not do anything at all. However, if you increase the weight by a factor of 1000, the house will collapse every time. Something like that might have happened at Thonis-Heracleion. The city was founded around 700 BC and reached its peak between 300 BC and 300 AD, which means it stood for nearly 1,000 years. Over the course of so many centuries, the soil beneath the city likely shifted and tilted in a process known as consolidation. The weight of the city pressed the clay beneath it closer together, turning it from loose silt into dense clay. Eventually, the clay became so compressed that it couldn't hold the weight of the city anymore. Some parts of the city sank beneath the waves, and others were abandoned. Over the course of a few centuries, the whole city was gone. It's hard to say exactly when this process began. It may have started shortly after the city was founded. After all, the ancient Egyptians knew the soil was weak and had to take special measures to build on it. Or perhaps the city only began to sink after it was sacked by Alexander the Great in 332 BC, whatever the case. The decline of Thonis-Heracleion was slow and inevitable. The first structures to succumb to the shifting soil were probably the ones built on the edge of the Rosetta Depression. In fact, the archaeological record suggests that the city shrank over time. Contracting inward toward the center of the depression, eventually, the coastline shifted so dramatically that the harbor became unusable. Around the same time, the western half of the city was hit by rising sea levels, which could have been caused by climate change, melting ice sheets, or any number of factors. As the waters rose, so did the Nile, which deposited even more silt and clay on top of the city. In the end, it wasn't a single earthquake, tsunami, or act of God that sank Thonis-Heracleion. Instead, the city was undone by a combination of factors that acted over the course of many centuries. Still, we often like to think of historical events as having a clear cause and effect. But sometimes reality is more complicated. Perhaps the story of Thonis-Heracleion can teach us something about that. What do you think caused the decline of Thonis-Heracleion? Let me know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe for more stories of history's greatest cities.